Her name was Sophie Bennett. She was 34 years old and worked as a school counselor at a public high school in Charleston. On the day her grandmother passed away, Sophie believed she was simply coming to say one final goodbye. She had no idea that just a few hours later, her entire family would begin to fall apart because of a secret that had been buried for more than a decade. That afternoon, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds. Eleanor's old house was filled with relatives. Soft conversations echoed throughout the living room. But amid the atmosphere of mourning, something felt wrong. While everyone else was sharing memories of Eleanor, Chloe Bennett sat at the dining table with several relatives discussing the inheritance. Not tomorrow, not next week, but on the very day of the funeral. Chloe had always been like that. She was the favored daughter of the family, the pride and joy Diane Bennett never stopped talking about. From the time she was young, Chloe always received the very best. The best schools, the best first car, the most expensive vacations. Sophie, on the other hand, was always expected to be understanding, to give in, to sacrifice. 15 years earlier, Sophie had earned a scholarship to a prestigious university in another state. It was an opportunity she had dreamed about throughout her teenage years. But just weeks before she was supposed to leave for college, Diane walked into her daughter's room. She explained that Chloe had just been accepted into an expensive private business program. The family could not afford both. Without arguing, Sophie gave up her dream. She stayed in Charleston, worked part-time jobs, attended a local college, and used most of her savings to help her younger sister. No one ever brought it up again. No one ever paid the money back. Over time, Sophie learned how to stay silent, but Eleanor did not. The elderly woman was the only person in the family who saw everything. Every summer, she would sit with Sophie on the front porch. One day, she took her granddaughter's hand and spoke softly. "One day, you will learn who truly loves you." At the time, Sophie simply smiled. She thought it was nothing more than a comforting remark. Now, as she stared at the empty chair where Eleanor used to sit, she felt a heavy ache in her chest. The gathering after the funeral continued through the late afternoon. Everything seemed normal, until the family attorney arrived. Mason Caldwell walked into the living room carrying an old leather briefcase. The room quickly fell silent. He looked at each member of the family before speaking. Before her passing, Eleanor left behind a special instruction. There was a private letter that had to be read in front of everyone. Sophie immediately noticed the change in her mother's expression. Diane clenched her hands tightly. Robert lowered his head, and Chloe's smile disappeared completely. A cold chill ran down Sophie's spine. For the first time that day, she felt that her grandmother had not simply left behind a letter, she had left behind a truth powerful enough to change everything. The room fell into complete silence as Attorney Mason Caldwell placed the cream-colored envelope on the table. No one spoke. No one dared to move. Every eye in the room was fixed on Eleanor's final letter. Mason slowly opened the envelope. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. The first lines were words of gratitude addressed to the family. But only a few minutes later, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Sophie noticed her mother's face growing paler with every passing second. Diane kept clenching and unclenching her hands. Robert stared down at the floor. And Chloe had completely lost her usual confidence. In the letter, Eleanor explained that she had established a private trust fund for Sophie many years earlier. It was money she had carefully saved and accumulated throughout most of her life. She wanted it to be given to Sophie at the right time. The room immediately erupted with whispers. Chloe jumped to her feet. Diane quickly interrupted the attorney. She insisted there had to be some kind of mistake. But Mason calmly pulled another file from his briefcase. He placed it on the table. Then he explained that every document was legally valid and had been verified years ago. Sophie sat frozen. She had never heard a single word about any trust fund. For years, she had believed Eleanor's estate consisted of nothing more than an old house and a few treasured keepsakes. But this was only the beginning. Mason opened another file. Stacks of bank statements appeared before everyone. He pointed to each transaction, each transfer, each withdrawal, and little by little, the truth began to emerge. The trust fund had been drained repeatedly over the years. Money had been transferred into Chloe's fashion company. Money had paid for luxurious vacations. Money had covered the family's mortgage payments. Money had financed the luxury vehicles Sophie had always believed her parents had purchased through their own hard work. The air in the room became suffocating. Sophie felt her heart pounding so hard it was almost impossible to breathe. The years she spent working after school. The weekends she sacrificed by taking extra counseling jobs to save money. The dreams she had postponed. All of it came rushing back at once. While she struggled to build her life piece by piece, her own money had been quietly taken from her by the people she trusted most. Chloe sprang to her feet. She insisted she had no idea where the money had come from. Diane immediately rushed to defend her daughter. Robert remained silent. But his silence was more frightening than any confession could have been. Then Mason reached into his briefcase one last time. He removed a final document. He explained that it had recently been discovered among Eleanor's private records. It was a written statement, signed and notarized only months before her death. Mason looked directly at Diane. Then he spoke slowly. I think everyone should prepare themselves for what comes next. Because what Eleanor left behind was not just evidence of the missing money. She also left behind the name of the person responsible for everything. And this time, no one would be able to hide the truth any longer. The courtroom was so quiet that the sound of papers turning on the attorney's table could be heard throughout the room. After months of investigation, legal battles, and testimony, everyone understood that this day would determine the future of the Bennett family. Sophie sat in the front row. Her expression was calm, not angry, not bitter, just exhausted, like someone who had finally lived long enough to see the truth come to light. Attorney Mason Caldwell rose to his feet. In his hands was the final document Eleanor had left behind, a legally notarized statement prepared only months before her death. Every sentence was read aloud in the silent courtroom. In it, Eleanor described in detail how she discovered that money from the trust fund had been disappearing for years. She recorded the dates, the amounts, the receiving accounts, even conversations she had accidentally overheard between Diane and Chloe. With every word that was read, Diane's face grew paler. Chloe no longer had the confidence to look anyone in the eye. Robert sat motionless. He looked like a man who had known how this story would end for a very long time. When the reading was over, the entire truth stood exposed. There were no explanations left that could save them. No story left that could change the fact that the money had always belonged to Sophie. Several hours later, the judge delivered the final ruling. The Bennett family was ordered to repay every dollar that had been improperly taken from the trust fund. They were also held responsible for the damages caused by years of mismanagement and misuse of those assets. At that moment, Diane broke down in tears. Chloe lowered her head in shame, and Sophie simply closed her eyes. The battle she had never wanted to fight had finally come to an end. But in reality, it was only the beginning of something much bigger. Over the following months, everything changed quickly. Chloe's business gradually lost customers and investors. The reputation Diane had spent years building began to crumble. People who had once admired the Bennett family now spoke of them as a cautionary tale. As for Sophie, she did something no one expected. She did not buy a mansion. She did not buy luxury cars. She did not seek revenge. Instead, she used most of the recovered money to pursue a dream she had postponed for far too long. 1 year later, at a newly built community center in Charleston, the first group of children walked through its doors. Mounted on the main wall near the entrance was a simple bronze plaque, Eleanor Bennett Youth Center. Sophie stood quietly in front of it for a long time. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Then her phone vibrated. A message from Diane. I know I was wrong. Can we start over? Sophie looked at the screen, then gently locked her phone. Not because she was still angry, but because she had learned the most important lesson of her life. Peace does not come from other people changing. Peace comes from no longer allowing them to control your life. She smiled softly. Children laughed and played in front of her. The dream she had once buried had finally become reality. And for the first time in many years, Sophie was no longer the girl who sacrificed everything for everyone else. She had become the person in control of her own future. If you were in Sophie's position, would you forgive your family, or would you choose to move forward with your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family stories, hidden family secrets, and inspiring journeys of self-worth and healing, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Every family has secrets. Some stay hidden for years. Others eventually find their way into the light. Sophie's story is a reminder that being kind does not mean accepting betrayal, and that sometimes the hardest choice is the one that leads to true peace. In the end, she did not win because she got her money back. She won because she finally chose herself. What would you have done in her situation? Would you have forgiven your family, or walked away forever? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more powerful family drama stories and hidden family truths.